Hi guys, in today's video we're going to talk about data confidentiality and data breach. So we're going to talk about what is data confidentiality, what are the risks. Hi guys, in today's video we're going to talk about data confidentiality and data breach. It's just to give you an overview of the topic. So we're going to talk about what is data confidentiality, what are the risks, what are the consequences if it ever occurs. We're going to gather some data, so what kind of threats we have, threat actors, those kind of things. We're gonna also talk about how to prevent, protect, detect, respond, and how to recover from data breaches. So this video is partially based on some other videos I've already made. So you have the list down, and if you would like to have some more details, you can go and see them. So we're going to talk about risk mitigation with technical, administrative, and physical security controls. We're also going to talk about access control categories as usual. So it's going to be prevention, protection, detection, response, and recovery. So what is data confidentiality? It's all about making sure that only authorized users or systems can access the data. It means that we need to implement some controls in order to prevent and protect from attacks and detect those attacks that could put the confidentiality of our data at risk and therefore having, for example, data breaches, data exfiltrations, etc. So not doing so could lead to security incidents, and that could lead also to a potential data breach. So not all security incidents are data breaches, but all data breaches are security incidents. Depending on the objectives of the attack, if a system gets compromised, it doesn't always mean that a data breach will occur. So for example, a ransomware, your system is compromised, but the objective of the attack is not to exfiltrate data. Usually it's just to encrypt them. So what is the risk? So we are going to lose data confidentiality because of an attack. So that means that the attacker, an unauthorized user or system, but also there's always a user behind a system, they have access to the data. So depending on the situation, if you have other weaknesses like operating system or packages vulnerabilities, some security misconfigurations or privileges misconfigurations, it could also lead to loss of integrity, so unauthorized data modification, and loss of availability, like data being encrypted or deleted. So what are the consequences? Well, usually it's going to be a loss of trust from your clients, your friends, your family, etc. You also have a loss of reputation, loss of clients, loss of money due to downtime, for example, and also to recover from this problem. You can have some lawsuits, and if you are a small company, bankruptcy, of course. This can happen. So what is the asset that I need to protect? So in this case with Synology NAS, we're going to protect the data. And it could be personal, confidential, or sensitive information, also proprietary information. What are the threat actors? For example, you could have a human malicious, it could be external or internal. It could be a hacker, a disgruntled employee, an ex maybe, you never know. It could also be, a human who makes, an accident, which means that someone is just curious, and because it has access to something he shouldn't have access to, he's going to fiddle around in the folders. There could be also bad configuration, like, misconfigured privileges. And also if you are testing stuff, maybe that while you are doing something, you are disclosing some information. What could be the security incident? So for example, we're going to have data which is exfiltrated by an authorized user and published on the internet. So the user is authorized to access the data but not to disclose, but still this could be considered as a data breach. And also data is exfiltrated by an unauthorized user and publishes the information on the internet or keeps the information for itself, to sell it, for example. So what could be the threats usually when we talk about data breaches? It could be your NAS that gets stolen, your hard disk drive that gets stolen. You can have also a stolen phone, and laptops. They have also data inside, so it could be a problem. You could have also old or defective hard disk drives that maybe you don't know what to do with them, or maybe you're going to return them to the manufacturer because you would like have a new one back, and maybe those are not correctly erased, and so if someone can access this data. Encryption keys get stolen or lost if you're using encryption in your Synology NAS. The NAS is compromised via exposed and internet-facing services, so by a hacker or maybe a malware that is on the internet. And also a lack of security knowledge, so you are going to apply the wrong permissions, the wrong privileges, because maybe you don't really understand what you're doing or the risks of not doing it right. An account can get compromised. You can forget about shared links in DS Cloud or Drive. So you are creating a link for someone to access some data, and you forgot that this folder is shared, and maybe in this case someone which is not authorized to access the data or to access new data that you are putting inside. Well, they can be accessed by someone who shouldn't have. Data in shared folders are not well organized. This is a little bit related to also privileges and network eavesdropping. If you are in a hotel or a public hotspot, for example, someone is listening on everything that you are transferring. So what could be the vulnerabilities? You could have some physical related vulnerabilities where the NAS and the hard disk drives are not secured. So it's just lying around. For example, it's not in a secure location where you can lock the devices. The unsecure storage of encryption keys. So if you're using a key manager in a USB key, where is this USB key? Is it always connected to the NAS because it's more practical, or you are putting it aside, in a secure location? Some administrative related vulnerabilities. So for example, you do not have any kind of disposal process for hard disk drives. So when something bad happens with the disk, what is going to happen with the old disk? Are you having some kind of process where you say that you have to put it in a secure location, then for example delete all the information, then maybe ghost it or deghost it, I don't remember which term, and maybe physically destroy the device, so all those kind of steps could be written so you have a good process. No security awareness for users or IT staff about threats. No deterrent measures like direct termination or legal actions in case of security violations. Usually you sign a contract where it says that you are obligated to to keep everything that you're learning to yourself and not to disclose any kind of information. This usually you sign it in your contract. It can also be done with contractors anyway, where there is a legal obligation of confidentiality when you're working with partners, for example. This has to be written. And also some technical controls, of course. Some technical vulnerabilities that you could have is because you are having an unsecure architecture. You have an operating system or packages that are unpatched. You are using wrong permissions or privileges. Can have flaws in access controls or having some privilege abuse cases. Using weak passwords, no antivirus, no firewall. Unsecure arrays of hard disk drives. Storing encryption keys in the same system that has the data. So for example, on Synology, you can store the encryption key in the system partition, which is something that should not be recommended. And no encryption data in transit or stored. So you can encrypt the data, by using a secure connection, and also you can encrypt the data when they're on the NAS in a shared folder, for example. If you're not using this, well, that's a vulnerability. So how to prevent? So for administrative controls, for example, you can sign contract with employees and contractors stating that if there are any kind of security violations that could put the data at risk in terms of confidentiality, well, there'll be some legal action behind them. Can also have some user awareness training and also IT staff awareness and training, and have a good HDD disposal process, for example. Those are just examples. There are many more. Data breach prevention with physical controls, for example, it would be to keep your NAS in a secure location and keep your removed hard disks in a secure location too, and keep any physical encryption keys locked away. So if you have a key manager, put it in a secure place. Just don't leave it lying around or connected to the NAS, for example. Now for technical controls, so this is a bit a part of my other videos on prevention. It's everything that you can do to try to reduce the risk, the probability of your NAS getting compromised. So this is just a recap. We have a user secure architecture, put the NAS in its own LAN where you can control everything which is going in and out. Do not allow direct traffic to the NAS, so you have to intercept any kind of protocols that are compatible with interception, like the HTTP protocol. You can use a network intrusion prevention system, use a network antivirus, filter incoming and outgoing traffic to the strict necessary, use web control and application control features, and whitelist the strict necessary that the NAS needs to access. So this is also on the other video. You can also use geographical IP restriction if possible. Do not expose services that don't need to be exposed. Do not expose administrative interfaces to the internet like the SSH or DSM interface. Use a dedicated VPN server, which is not directly in the NAS. Use a SSL VPN as a bastion, so if you have another device like a router, for example, which has a VPN functionality, you can use it. Use only encrypted protocols. Do not use Quick Connect and Synology DDNS. Use signed certificates and prefer not to host a public-facing website on the same NAS than the one storing confidential data. So if the first NAS is the public-facing NAS is getting compromised, well, it's not as important. You have also to apply the latest operating system and packages updates as soon as they arrive, so they can correct some flaws. You should also apply hardening and best practices. So, for example, change default ports, disable unused and unsafe services, disallow unauthenticated services, use only Synology packages and maybe not some community packages. Don't use the NAS or proxy VPN. The NAS VPN or proxy server package. Disable guest account and share default admin account. Use two-factor authentication and try not to use non-compatible two-factor authentication services. So this is maybe more difficult, or maybe don't use non-compatible 2FA services facing the internet. So for example, you've got WebDAV, you've got SMB, you've got NFS, the Apple file system, also network protocol, and for example everything that is you have the CalDAV and CardDAV packages, for example. You can also have a strong password policy and enable IP auto block and account protection. So now this is all around preventing your NAS of getting compromised, so you can avoid getting hacked and maybe have a confidentiality problem. Now we're going to talk about protection. So the problem that you wanted to prevent just arrived. Now how are you going to protect your data if it happens? So there are different scenarios. For example, you got your NAS, your hard disk, or your backup disk is stolen. So how can you limit the severity, the impact of this incident? How can you still have your data protected in this case? So here you can use the shared folder encryption. This is important in this kind of situation because as the NAS is off, the shared folders will not be mounted and they will need to enter the passphrase or the key file to access the data. You also have to use strong and different encryption keys for shared folders, for the key managers, and for the key manager and for the backups, like with Hyper Backup, for example. Don't use the auto mount feature, and don't leave the key manager in the system partition or in an always connected USB key. And also organize data in shared folders, depending on their level of confidentiality, for example. You never know if maybe someone discovers the key or the passphrase of the shared folder, and it's maybe the one of the public folder, for example, that still need to work to decrypt the confidential shared folder, for example. So just try to organize your data in a, depending on their confidentiality level. Now there is another scenario. Now it's the NAS is on, and the NAS or one account, a user or administrator account, is compromised, and so now a hacker has a foothold in it, so he can connect whenever he wants. So in this case, shared folder encryption is of no use, because the shared folders will be in a decrypted state when the NAS is up and the folders mounted. If you want to work with your NAS, the folders, they have to be mounted. So it means that the hacker has an access to the data. And how can we limit the severity of this breach, of this system, of this compromission, I mean? And how can you still protect your data? So you could, for example, still organize data in shared folders depending on their confidentiality level. So this is applicable if a standard user gets compromised, and we can think that this user doesn't have access to confidential data, for example. If an administrator account is hacked, well, this will have no effect anyway. You have to correctly configure permissions on a need-to-know or least privilege model. A user doesn't need to access this kind of information, just don't give him the possibility to access this data. And use end-to-end data at rest encryption software like Boxcryptor or Cryptomator. So data is only decrypted on the end device only when the data is requested. And this is compatible with Synology Cloud and Synology Drive on a computer. And also compatible with smartphones with a dedicated app. But here you have to use the WebDAV service on Synology. Of course, using this kind of softwares will degrade the user experience or the functionality that you can use with your NAS. So the shared folders links, for example, they will be of no use if you'd like to share something with someone. And in some cases, the what is the function? Not the snapshots, but the history, the revision of files might not be working. This can depend on the software that is being used. And of course, you have to be consistent in your approach of encryption. So what are you going to do is your phone or laptop is stolen because you're going to have some data inside probably. So you have to use encryption on those devices too. And if your network is compromised, well, if you're using encrypted protocols only, and if your softwares are configured to verify the certificate, well, you should be protected. Now, for the detection, how can you detect that data is being stolen or might be at risk? So first of all, you need to define some abuse cases. Okay, so what could be the problem? It could be a compromised NAS, a compromised account, a device that gets stolen, for example. And you need to think about, what could be the exfiltration channels. So for example, if you're using wrong permissions and you can use a USB key on a laptop, then someone could abuse everything to download all the data. If your NAS has a unrestricted access to the internet, in this case, if the NAS gets compromised, the hacker, it will be very easy for him to exfiltrate all kind of data through the DNS tunneling, through the HTTP protocol, or a reverse shell, for example. A lot of things could happen. And so you need a baseline on your current NAS activity, because if someone tries to steal a lot of things, maybe there will be an unusual amount of CPU, RAM, or HDD activity, or network activity, or network services that are being used. So it will allow you to detect any kind of unusual network connections, maybe through the firewall logs, IPS logs, WAF logs, unusual failed authentication attempts, for example, unusual sources trying to connect with a specific account, maybe high CPU and disk activities. You can have in the logs a user accessing, not modifying, but accessing way too many files in a short period of time, which means that it's not a human which is doing this. And maybe your system can get slow. But this is, it really depends if someone is trying to be discreet or not. If it's going to be discreet, probably if you don't have any kind of protection, you will never see what's happening. If someone tries to go very strong on your system to rapidly download all your data, well, you might feel it, but truthfully, the chances are very low that you will ever discover a data breach because of unusual CPU activity, for example, or hard disk activity. Usually they can be discrete. They're going to maybe access specific files. So this can be very, very hard. I could also implement logging and alerting with Log Center and also inside of the packages to see if there are any kind of strange user login, file access or activity. So it can help. You can also use Security Advisor, for this login analysis if there is something suspicious. It can also be used to scan for any kind of malicious programs, tasks, system configurations, scripts, and abnormal users that maybe could be used for exfiltration. Can use also the Synology antivirus in the detection, because as it's not a real time, it's not really any kind of prevention or protection measure. It's more of detection and maybe a little bit of protection, of course, but rarely in prevention. And you can also create canary files and alerts in case of access. Okay, so if someone accesses a file that should not be accessed because this is just a dummy file, a canary file, or maybe this file has also a word with scripting inside, and when someone opens the file, it's going to alert you that someone has opened this file over the internet. So maybe there is something that can be done to see that something weird happens. For the response, well, as usual in a response plan, okay, it will allow you to know how to handle the situation, to handle this situation in order to limit the damages. So you have to prepare the response plan, the policies, the contact to call, the team to gather. You need to identify if the event is really an incident, it's not a false positive, for example. You have to contain the incident to limit the impact, eradicate the source of the problem, and recover from the incident. So can you put the system back online after you think that you have eradicated the threat? And of course, you have to learn of your mistakes. For the recovery, you cannot recover from a data breach. When it's done, it's done. There is no coming back. And you can just learn from your mistakes and just cross your fingers that everything you have implemented in the protection phase, is strong enough. The next video, or one of the next videos, I'm gonna try to show you how to use and maybe try to make a little comparison of Box Scriptor and Cryptometer, which they allow you to have the data that will always be encrypted in the NAS, even if the NAS is running. And the only way to decrypt it is to have the software, to have the key, and to have access to the device that has the software and the key. So it can be a computer, it can be a smartphone. And I'm trying to show you what are the difference in terms of functionality. So what could you lose with in terms of functionality with Synology if you're using this kind of programs. Well, that's it. I hope this video has been informative for you, and feel free to ask me any kind of questions. Bye bye.